Yeah, there are a lot of books in the Bible, but this is finally, in a way, the last one in the Old Testament, which we are talking about. It's the book of Malachi. The riddle starts already with a name. We do not know is this a name or a title, because Malach in Hebrew means messenger.
The name Malachi actually is interesting because Malachi means my messenger, and the Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint, understands it to be a title, my messenger, but the Hebrew Old Testament understands it to be a name, Malachi. So we don't know which it was. It might well have been a name.
We do not know anything about the author. We do not know much about the time, but we assume that it describes the situation in the Jewish state, which is at this time just a Persian province. That means a province within the Persian Empire. That means Jerusalem in the center and perhaps 20 kilometers in each direction around. This is Yehud, where the Jews then got their name from. So this is the area we are talking about, and it's perhaps the 5th century, early 5th century, a situation where those who come back from the exile established the temple again. It was a kind of routine again, but in a way that they don't take God too serious. So they offered blemished animals. There was no much longing for God. So the prophet, we call him now Malachi, he in a way argues with the people.
Now Malachi in some ways is an obscure minor prophet because he's simply bashing Israel for falling short of what God wanted. But there are one or two things that are quite relevant to today.
Malachi is the first arguing prophet. So he says, this is the point God brings against you. You say, and this is a conclusion. So it's we have what is called discussion words. So we have 6 times a kind of, this is what I need to say against you, and now you can defend yourself, and then comes the point.
One of the things that he says is he's grumbling at them because their giving has become really nominal, and he says, give me your full tithe or tenth of your income, and you're on the way to restoration. Now, one of the reasons why this is particularly interesting at the moment is because the General Synod of the Church of England traditionally has said, give 5% of your income after tax and absolutely necessary expenses to the work of the Kingdom of God. And many of us have felt that 5% is a bit unsatisfactory. I remember the former Bishop of Worcester said, oh, well, if you want half Christians, tell them to give 5%.
What makes Malachi important is indeed its place at the end of the Christian Old Testament, and therefore the one who bridges, at least in a normal Protestant Bible, from the Old Testament to the New Testament.
But actually a full tithe, at a recent General Synod meeting, it was unanimously passed that 5% should go to the home churches to work in England, and 5% should go to overseas work, and not just to Christian work, but to social work, to the poor, the destitute, the needy, and so on. So for the first time, Synod has restored to the Church of England the same teaching as in Malachi. If you're a Christian, you should be giving a full tenth to God and not just a 20th, as the bishop put it, whole Christians, not half Christians. That accords with Malachi.
And so I have here different Bibles on my table because there are some differences. So this is a Revised Standard Version, so let's say traditional Protestant Bible. You have Malachi, 4 chapters, but only in English Bibles you have 4 chapters. The Hebrew Bible and other translations have only 3. And then you turn the page and you start with the New Testament. So if you have a Bible which has the Apocrypha included, you will have the book of Malachi. and then the apocryphal book start, and then only after the apocryphal books you will have the New Testament.
Then the other thing is, Malachi blames the priests and religious officers for the state of affairs as much as the people in general. And he's saying to the priests, you're going through the motions of worship and service, but you're actually saying to yourself, oh, what a weariness all this is. Oh, I wish it was over. Oh, we wish we hadn't got to do it, and so on. And so he's saying that the priests themselves are a blemish on the whole community of believing people. So Malachi has a second message to tithing, which is that even church officers can bring the church or the synagogue or the Jewish community into disrepute. So it's a warning really to religious leaders.
And for the understanding of the connectivity between the Old Testament and the New Testament, Malachi is extremely important. And Malachi, when we will have a look at the last verses of Malachi, already have an idea that Malachi combines Torah, that means the law of Moses, and the prophets. So it's a kind of summary book already in the Old Testament, and it's therefore properly placed at the end of the Old Testament.
And then a third thing that's interesting for today is that most of their falling short was actually unconscious. There's a nice dialogue form in Malachi where the prophet says to them, you've sinned in this particular way or fallen short in this particular way. And the people reply, how have we? How have we really fallen short? And it's as if they've fallen short without realizing it. And in a sense, this anticipates what's obvious since Freud. We all have unconscious drives and things that we're not wholly aware of. And part of Malachi's task is to bring that to their consciousness and say, no, you're deceiving yourselves. You really are falling short.
So Malachi is at the end, and if we look at the last verses of Malachi, then it says, remember the law of my servant Moses, the statutes and ordinances that I commanded him at Horeb for all Israel.
And then finally about Malachi in chapter 4, his last chapter, the end of chapter 3 and chapter 4, this has entered Handel's Messiah, because he will come like a refiner. He will come with a refiner's fire.
For he is like a refiner's fire. For he is like a refiner's fire.
And that's part of Handel's Messiah and known to a lot of people.
Behold, I will send you Elijah, the prophet, before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. And he will turn the hearts of fathers to their children and the hearts of children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the land with a curse. So the coming Elijah stands at the end, Elijah the prophet. And if you then turn the page and you start with the book of Matthew, at least in the Protestant Bible, then the Gospel of Matthew, after the introductory chapters about the birth of Jesus, it starts with John the Baptist. And in a way, the story of Jesus starts with John the Baptist. John the Baptist is, so to speak, the last prophet, and he's actually described by Jesus as he is the coming Elijah. He's the one Malachi prophesied, and now the day of judgment will come.
Yes, it is a fitting conclusion to the Old Testament, because as well as pointing to a future coming of God, it also says that he will send a figure rather like John the Baptist proves to be, a special prophet who will inaugurate the last days. And that's seen as fulfilled by many in the beginning of the New Testament, because many of the Gospels begin with John the Baptist. So it's quite a useful sort of link book, even though it's not the latest book to have been written.